everyone, this is Professor Marcel Rominger, and this is Module 9, and we are talking about harmonization and analysis. Okay, so I hope you really enjoyed the piece of music that was playing in the beginning. So that was a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach called the Suite for Solo Cello, and he wrote many of them. This one is the first one in G major, and we were listening to the first part, which is the prelude. Okay, so why don't we take a look at what the score looks like. Let's take a look at what the actual music looks like on the page. All right, so here is the Suite for Solo Cello. Now, if you take a look at this, and if you know anything about cello, you'll know that cello is primarily not a chordal instrument. It plays one note at a time. So what we are looking in front of us could be described as a melody. It's playing this very beautiful, timeless melody. However, if this is a melody, why are we using this as an example to talk about harmonization, which primarily deals with chords and triads, notes being played simultaneously? Okay, well, the reason is because when we listen to this melody, there's an implied harmony that goes along with it. Okay, let's listen to it one more time and let's see if we can hear this implied harmony. Okay, so hopefully you were able to detect that we were moving from one harmony to another as we were moving from the notes of one measure to the notes of another measure. Okay, now remember, whenever I want to find out what the harmony is, the first thing we have to do is we have to take the notes that are within that measure and we have to stack them into thirds. That's the only way that we can find out what is actually happening harmonically. So that's what I did right here. Okay, so as you can see, I've included triads, basic triads with every single measure here. Let's go ahead and listen to those triads. Okay, now if you'll also notice that with each one of these harmonies or these triads, I did not include all the notes of the measure. So there were some notes that I left out. Now why would I do that? Well, there's a very, very good reason on why I chose some notes and not all the notes, okay? And I'm going to explain this a little bit better towards the end of the video, okay? Now, once in a while you might choose a harmony and you might think it's correct, but it might not actually be correct. So here's a really good test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the melody that's on the page, but I'm also simultaneously going to play the harmonies or the chords on top of it. So let's do that. Okay, so that seems like a pretty decent fit, all right? So the harmonies pretty much coincide with the notes that are on the score, okay? So if that is true, well then we can go ahead and include our Roman numerals. Okay, so I've included the Roman numerals as well as the labels for those Roman numerals. So for instance, we start with the one chord, which is the tonic. It makes sense because that's the main chord or the main harmony that goes along with this key in G major. Next, we move to a predominant harmony, which is the 4 chord, and of course, predominant could mean almost any harmony that comes before 5, mostly 4 or 2. In this case, it's 4. Then we move to the dominant harmony in measure 3, okay, which then resolves to the tonic harmony in measure 4. Okay, so if you'll also take a look at measures 2 and 3, you'll see that there's numbers after the Roman numerals. This tells us that those harmonies are not in root position. Okay, that means that the root of the chord is not on the bottom. Okay, so let's explore that a little bit more. So remember, bass notes don't always equal the root. Okay, so here in measures 1 in measure 1 and measure 4, the root is on the bottom. There's no numbers that come after the Roman numerals. So the main note of that harmony or that chord is on the bottom. However, in measure 2, we'll see that the root is not in the bass. The root is actually all the way on the top, the root of the chord being C. So he puts it actually on the very top of one of the very top notes. Now, take a look at measure 3. Now, in measure 3, two things are happening. One, I did not circle a root. I don't know if you noticed that, but I did not circle any one of these notes as the root of the chord. Well, the root is not there. The root is actually implied. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is that G that's being circled right now, you'll notice that it is not part of the actual dominant harmony. So the G is not part of D, F sharp A, which is the 5 or the dominant harmony. So how can we explain what's happening with that G? Okay, why is it there? Well, it is actually a non-chord tone. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that the G is not part of the dominant. It's kind of sort of there for some reason other than being a harmonic tone. So there are many good reasons on why composers use non-chord tones. Okay, for this G, for instance, Bach probably wanted to continue the texture of the piece, so he decided, well, you know what? I've put G starting on every single measure. I might as well start this measure with G as well. So that could be a reason on why the G is there. If I had to circle all the non-chord tones that are existing in these 4 measures, it would look like this. So right now, all the non-chord tones that exist are circled. Okay, non-chord tones are actually very, very useful, even though they are not part of the actual harmony. But we need them to help create melodies, to make melodies sound more fluid and more beautiful. Okay, so they are extremely functional. But we're not going to talk too much about non-chord tones right now. We're going to save that for a different video. Thank you. Okay, for this quick check, why don't we do a little bit of a harmonic analysis? So we've been discussing this Mozart sonata for a while, so it seems only appropriate that we do a little bit of a harmonic analysis and try to understand what's happening in this passage. Okay, so this seems a bit long, so why don't we shorten it down to 2 measures. We know that this is in the key of C major, so that's going to give us a little bit of an advantage. All right, so let's take a look at that first measure and let's see if we can figure out what harmony is being used there. So pause the video and see if you can figure it out yourself. And when you think you have the answer, unpause. Did you come up with the answer? Okay, so if you said the 1 chord, you're absolutely correct, but let's talk about how we got there. So first things first is we have to take a look at those notes that are in the left hand. And we're going to take those notes and we're going to want to stack them into thirds so it looks like a triad like this. Once we do that, we got to focus on that bottom note. That's going to tell us the name of the triad. And since this triad is based on the first scale degree in the key of C, then we know that C is the first scale degree and therefore it is the 1 chord. So that is how we were able to determine that harmony. So what about the second measure? Let's see if you can figure out what is going on harmonically in the second measure. Pause the video. When you think you have the answer, unpause. Did you come up with the answer? All right, so let's, before we actually say the answer, let's see if we can notice some patterns that are happening in this left hand to make finding the answer a little easier. So first things first, I noticed that in the second half of the second measure, I noticed that we have the same notes and patterns that we had in the first measure. So this is different from what's happening at the beginning of the second measure. So this leads me to believe that the 1 chord is the harmony that is being used at the end of measure 2. So the 1 chord definitely comes back again. But what's happening in the beginning of measure 2? What's the harmony here? Well, one common mistake is that a lot of people will take a look at that bottom note, kind of like how we looked at the bottom note in measure 1, and maybe they'll take the notes and they will sort of try to stack them, but rather than put them into thirds, they'll just go right to that bottom note and they'll say, oh, based on that bottom note, which is a D, which is the 2nd scale degree of the C major, I am going to say that that harmony is 2. However, that is completely false. This harmony that harmony is definitely not based on the scale degree, because that D is not the root. So what we need to do is we need to take those notes that we find in the beginning of measure 2 and we need to stack them into thirds. Now I noticed that I actually expanded the highlighted area to include also the right hand, because that's not all the notes were actually in the left hand. So for instance, that B is the first note in the right hand, so that's where I got the B. And I was able to stack them to make a 7th chord, G, B, D, and F. But the most important thing is that the G is on the bottom. The G is the root. So because the G is the root, that's the 5th scale degree, and because it is a 5/7, this leads me to believe that that is the harmony being used at the beginning of measure 2. And this just makes sense in regards to functional harmony, because while 1 won't always necessarily lead to 5, 5 will definitely most likely lead to the 1 chord. If you got this answer correct, good job. You are on the right track.